Angula-yodhisascha me Yagnena kalpentan Rukcha me Samacha me Stomascha me Jajuscha me Dikshacha me Tapascha ma Rutuscha me Vratam cha me Horatrayo Drishyam Ratratantare cha me Yagnena kalpetam Garbhascha me vasascha me travischa me travicha me dityavacha me dityohicha me panchavischa me panchavicha me trivatsascha me trivatsacha me tulyavacha me tulya.
All right, welcome everybody. Today's practice. I'm going to be exploring the teachings of Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi today. So today is going to be a slightly different session. I'm going to be reading from a book, very famous book called Be As You Are, The Teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, edited by David Godman. And I'm going to be reading chapter number 5, Self-Inquiry Practice. So that's what today is about. And even though I'm reading, it's still going to be a somewhat meditative session because I would like you to keep pace with me in terms of the practice. So let's do this. We're going to be exploring self-inquiry today. So for those of you who don't know, Bhagwan Ramana Maharshi, great sage of India, of course, is of the world, doesn't belong to India, but at a rather young age in school, he came home and something got into his mind and he pretended as though he's dead. And he imagined himself as dying and dead, and then his family discovers and they howl and they cry, and after a while they take him and they cremate him. And that entire process he played out in his head. And in his case, it went so deep that he just realized that even death can't destroy him. And he was actually self-realized, even as a school-going child. And then through a series of experiences over the next few days, he ended up being drawn to a place called Arunachala, or Tiruvannamalai, there's a mountain called Arunachala. And he was drawn there, and he spent the rest of his life never moving more than 3 miles away from the base of the mountain. And this is the sage of Arunachala, Tiruvannamalai. So yeah, he's somehow better known abroad than in India for some reason. But he's one of the foremost sages of the last century. So let us now learn what Sri Ramana Maharshi has to say about self-inquiry. Beginners in self-inquiry were advised by Sri Ramana to put their attention on the inner feeling of I and hold that feeling as long as possible. They would be told that if their attention was distracted by other thoughts, they should revert to awareness of the I thought whenever they became aware that their attention had wandered. He suggested various aids to assist this process. One could ask oneself, who am I? Or where does this I come from? But the ultimate aim was to continue to be aware of the I, which assumes that it is responsible for all the activities of the body and mind. So let me, maybe after each paragraph, I can say a few things just to make it more clear. As you're hearing this, there's an assumption that you're hearing this, right? You're hearing this, or if your eyes are open, you're seeing something. So there's an assumption that you're seeing something, right? So Ramana Maharshi is saying, come back to this, come back to the convergence. Where do sight, sound, smell, taste, touch? Where do all these things converge? A fun way of saying this is, who is taking delivery of the experience? Who is taking delivery of what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Who takes delivery? Who takes delivery of all your moods and emotions? And you'll say, I do. And Ramana Maharshi is saying, yes, now stay with this I. Stay with this inner feeling of I. I'll give you a few other ways as we go along, but this is good for now. Right, let's keep going. In the early stages of practice, attention to the feeling I is a mental activity which takes the form of a thought or a perception. As the practice develops, the thought I gives way to a subjectively experienced feeling of I. And when this feeling ceases to connect and identify with thoughts and objects, it completely vanishes. What remains is an experience of being in which the sense of individuality has temporarily ceased to operate. The experience may be intermittent at first, but with repeated practice, it becomes easier and easier to reach and maintain. When self-inquiry reaches this level, there is an effortless awareness of being in which individual effort is no longer possible, since the I who makes the effort has temporarily ceased to be. It is not self-realization, since the I thought will periodically reassert itself, but it is the highest level of practice. Repeated experience of this state of being weakens and destroys our underlying mental tendencies, which cause the I thought to arise. And when their hold has been sufficiently weakened, the power of the self destroys the residual tendencies so completely that the I thought never arises again. And this is the irreversible state of self-realization. This paragraph is very significant. A lot of things have been said here. I don't know how many of you noticed, but a lot is packed in this paragraph. So in the early form of the practice, he's saying it's more or less like a thought, or the I is like a thought or a perception. Yeah, I have a sense of I. But as you develop the practice, the thought will give way to a subjectively experienced feeling. This is very interesting. The feeling of I. The feeling of I. Think it till you feel it. And feel it till you are it. You become it. At some point, even that feeling will cease to connect and identify with thoughts and object. It will vanish. And what is left is an experience of being where the sense of individuality has temporarily vanished. It will be intermittent at first, but with repeated practice, it becomes easier and easier to reach and maintain. And I like how he says that it is not self-realization, since the I thought will reassert itself, but it is the highest level of practice. This is a good distinction. So I'm going to say it in simpler words. Our work is to come back to this sense of I. This is half the work. It's not the full journey, but it's half the journey. Half the journey is to come back to the sense of I. So instead of I am this and I am that, and I want this and I want that, and I wish and I wouldn't, and 100 things you attach to the I, million things you attach to the I. Step back from all the attachments, take out all the additional attachments that you put onto the I, and come back to the basic I. And this is the highest level of practice. There's still more practice, but at this point, this is where it gets interesting. At this point, it goes beyond your effort. So you come to this point, then you don't get wisdom, then wisdom gets you. Then you're ripe for the picking. I find that so beautiful. So this is the highest level of practice. Your job is to come to this point where you have segregated, separated, refined, and fine-tuned back down to the sense of I. That feeling of I. It begins with the thought I, then it comes to the feeling I, and eventually it just is. This is the highest level of practice. Now from here, through what you could call grace, or when the time is ripe, when it needs to happen, then even this I will be plucked and picked. And that's when you go from the small self to the true self. That's when you go from presence to essence. from Brahman to Parabrahman. Let's keep going. This practice of self-attention or awareness of the I thought is a gentle technique which bypasses the usual repressive methods of controlling the mind. This is not an exercise in concentration, nor is it aimed at suppressing our thoughts. It merely invokes awareness of the source from which the mind springs. The method and goal of self-inquiry is to abide in the source of the mind and to be aware of what one really is by withdrawing the attention and interest from what one is not. In the early stages, effort in the form of transferring attention from the thoughts to the thinker is essential. But once awareness of the I feeling has been firmly established, further effort is counterproductive. From then on, it is more a process of being than doing, of effortless being rather than an effort to be. Being what one already is effortless, since beingness is always present and always experienced. On the other hand, pretending to be what one is not, which is the body and mind, requires continuous mental effort, even though the effort is nearly always at a subconscious level. It therefore follows that in the higher stages of self-inquiry, effort takes attention away from the experience of being, while the cessation of mental effort reveals it. Ultimately, the self is not discovered as a result of doing anything, but only by being. Ramana Maharshi himself often remarked, "Do not meditate, be. Do not think that you are, be. Do not think about being, you are." Self-inquiry should not be regarded as a meditation practice that takes place at certain hours and in certain positions. It should continue throughout one's waking hours, irrespective of what one is doing. Ramana Maharshi saw no conflict between working and self-inquiry, and he maintained that with a little practice, it could be done under all circumstances. He did sometimes say that regular periods of formal practice were good for beginners, but he never advocated long periods of sitting meditation, and he always showed his disapproval when any of his devotees expressed a desire to give up mundane activities in favor of a meditative life. Very beautiful. So what can I say about some of the things said here? Keep transferring the thought from the activities of your life and keep coming back to the source. What's the source of the mind? Who is taking delivery of this experience? Who's hearing this? Who's trying to understand this? Who's trying to improve their life? Who likes this session or doesn't like this session? I do. Who am I? So another way of practicing is you ask yourself, what is happening now? What is happening now? I'm sharing some teachings on self-inquiry. Oh, really? Who's sharing teachings on self-inquiry? I am. Oh, who am I? Where am I? What is this I? And that's how you can instantly take attention away from the multiplicity to the singularity. What's the multiplicity? Throughout the day, you say, what is happening now? Something different is happening. You're listening to music, or you're cooking, or you're talking to someone, or you're walking, or you're figuring something out, or you're organizing your desk. What is happening now? I'm organizing my desk. Who's organizing the desk? I am. Oh, who am I? When you say I am, come from the feeling I am. Is it in your heart? Is it in your chest? Is it in your belly? Is it in your face? Where is the sense of I am located? So shift from thinking about I am to feeling the I am. Who am I? And penetrate that feeling. Come into pure being. So behind the thinking is the feeling, and behind the feeling is the being. And behind the being is our true self, true being. Infinite nature, true nature. Question answer. Questioner says, you say one can realize the self by a search for it. What is the character of the search? And Ramana Maharshi says, you are the mind, or think that you are the mind. The mind is nothing but thoughts. Now, behind every particular thought, there is a general thought, which is the I thought, and that is yourself. Let us call this I the first thought. Now you stick to this I thought and you question it and you find out what is it. When this question takes strong hold in you, you will not think of any other thoughts. Questioner says, when I do this and I cling to myself, that is the I thought, other thoughts come and go, but I say to myself, who am I? And there is no answer forthcoming. To be in this condition is the practice. Is that so? And Ramana Maharshi says, this is a mistake that people often make. What happens when you make a serious quest for the self is that the I thought disappears and something else from the depths takes hold of you. And that is not the I which commenced the search. The questioner says, what is this something else? And Ramana Maharshi answers, that is the real self. That is the import of I. It is not the ego. It is the supreme being itself. Questioner, but you have often said that one must reject other thoughts when one begins the quest. But thoughts are endless. If one thought is rejected, another comes, and there seems to be no end at all. And Ramana Maharshi says, I do not say that you must go on rejecting thoughts. Just cling to this I thought. When your interest keeps you to the single idea, other thoughts will automatically get rejected. They will vanish. Questioner, so rejection of thoughts is not necessary? And Ramana Maharshi answers, no. It may be necessary for a time or for some. You fancy that there is no end if one goes on rejecting every thought as it arises. It is not true. There is an end. If you are vigilant and you make a stern effort to reject every thought when it arises, you will soon find that you're going deeper and deeper into your own self. And at that level, it is not necessary to make any effort to reject thoughts. Questioner, then it is possible to be without effort, to be without strain? An answer, not only that, it is impossible for you to make an effort beyond a certain extent. Questioner, I want to be further enlightened. Should I try to make no effort then? Answer, here it is impossible for you to be without effort. When you go deeper, it is impossible for you to make any effort. If the mind becomes introverted through inquiry into the source of the aham vritti, the sense of self, the vasanas become extinct. The vasanas are the mental fluctuation, which are pulling you here and there. The light of the self falls on the vasanas and produces the phenomena of reflection that we call the mind. Thus, when the vasanas become extinct, the mind also disappears, being absorbed into the light of the one reality, the heart. This is the sum and substance of all that an aspirant needs to know. What is imperatively required of him is an earnest and one-pointed inquiry into the source of the aham vritti, the sense of I am. Question, how should a beginner start this practice? Answer, the mind will subdue only by means of the inquiry, who am I? The thought, who am I, will destroy all other thoughts. It will finally itself be destroyed, like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre. If other thoughts arise, one should, without attempting to complete them, inquire, to whom do these thoughts arise? What does it matter? However many thoughts arise, at the very moment that each thought arises, if one vigilantly inquires, to whom did this thought just arise? It will be known to me. And then if one inquires, then who am I? The mind will turn back to its source. And the thought which has arisen will also subside. By repeatedly practicing this way, the power of the mind to abide in its source will increase. Although tendencies towards sense objects, Vishay vasanas, which have been recurring down the ages, rise in countless numbers like the waves in the ocean, they will all perish. As meditation on one's own nature becomes more and more intense, without giving room even to the doubting thought, is it really possible to destroy all these tendencies to remain in the self alone? One should persistently cling fast to self-attention. As long as there are tendencies towards sense objects in the mind, the inquiry, who am I, is necessary. As and when thoughts arise, one should annihilate all of them through inquiry, then and there, at their very place of origin. Not attending to what is other, anya, is non-attachment, viragya, or desirelessness, nirasa. Not leaving knowledge, not leaving self with capital S is knowledge, jnana. In truth, these two, desirelessness and knowledge, are one and the same, just as a pearl diver tying a stone to his waist dives into the sea and takes the pearl lying at the bottom. So everyone diving deep within himself with non-attachment can attain the pearl of self. If one resorts uninterruptedly to the remembrance, of one's real nature, swarupa smarana, until one attains self, that alone will be sufficient. Inquire, who am I that is in bondage? And know your real nature, swarupa. This alone is liberation. Always keeping the mind fixed in the self alone is called self-inquiry, whereas meditation, dhyana, is thinking oneself to be absolute, Brahman, which is Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Question. The yogis say that one must renounce this world and go off into secluded jungles if one wishes to find this truth. And Ramana Maharshi says the life of action need not be renounced. If you meditate for an hour or two every day, you can then carry on with your duties. If you meditate in the right manner, then the current of the mind induced will continue to flow even in the midst of your work. It is as though there are two ways of expressing the same idea, the same line which you take in meditation will be expressed in your activities. And questioner, what will the result be of doing that? An answer, as you go on, you will find that your attitude towards people and events and objects will gradually change. Your actions will tend to follow your meditation of their own accord. How is it possible to become selfless while leading a life of worldly activity? And Ramana Maharshi says there is no conflict between work and wisdom. Do you mean that one can continue all the old activities in one's profession, for instance, at the same time get enlightenment? Maharshi says, why not? But in that case, you will not think that it is the old personality which is doing the work, because one's consciousness will gradually become transferred until it is centered in that which it is beyond the little self. If a person is engaged in work, there'll be very little time left for them to meditate. And Ramana Maharshi says, setting time apart for meditation is only for the merest spiritual novices. The person who is advancing will begin to enjoy the deeper beatitude, whether he is at work or not. While his hands are in society, his head is cool, his head is in solitude. Then you do not teach the way of yoga. And Maharshi says, the yogi tries to drive his mind to the goal, as a cowherd drives a bullock with a stick. But in this path, the seeker coaxes the bull by holding out a handful of grass. How is that done? Says the questioner, asks the questioner. And Maharshi says, you have to ask yourself the question, who am I? This investigation will lead in the end to the discovery of something within you which is behind the mind. Solve that great problem and you will solve all other problems. Questioner, when I seek the I, there is nothing to be seen. Answer, there is nothing to be seen because you're accustomed to identifying yourself with the body, with the sight of your eyes, and therefore you see you do not see anything. What is there to be seen? Who is going to see? How to see? There's only one consciousness, which is manifesting as the I thought. It is identifying itself with the body, projecting itself through the eyes, and seeing the world around. The individual is limited in the waking state and expects to see something different. The evidence of his senses will be the seal of authority, but he will not admit that the seer, the seen, and the seen, the seer, the seen, and the seeing are all manifestations of the same consciousness, this I. Contemplation will help one to overcome the illusion that the self must be visual. There is nothing visual. How do you feel the I now? Do you hold a mirror before you know your true being? Awareness is the I. Realize it, and that is the truth. When I try to Question, who am I? I fall into sleep. What should I do? Maharshi says, persist in the inquiry throughout your waking hours. That is quite enough. If you keep on making the inquiry till you fall asleep, the inquirer will go on during sleep as well. Take up the inquiry again as soon as you wake up. Questioner, how can I get peace? I do not seem to obtain it through vichara. And Ramana Maharshi says, peace is your natural state. It is the mind that obstructs the natural state. If you do not experience peace, it means that your vichara has been made only in the mind. Investigate what the mind is and it will disappear. There's no such thing as mind apart from thought. Nevertheless, because of the emergence of thought, you surmise something from which it starts and term that the mind. When you probe to see what it is, you will find that it is really no such thing as mind. When the mind has thus vanished, you realize eternal peace. The following story illustrates this point very well. A yogi has been doing penance, tapasya, for a number of years on the banks of the river Ganges. When he had attained a high degree of concentration, he believed that continuance at that stage for prolonged periods constituted liberation and practiced it. One day, before going into deep concentration, he felt thirsty and called to his disciple to bring a little drinking water from the Ganges. But before the disciple arrived with the water, he had gone into yoga nidra and remained in that state for many years, during which time much water flowed under the bridge. When he woke up from this experience, he immediately called, water, water. But there was neither his disciple nor the river Ganges in sight. The first thing which he asked for was water, because before going into deep concentration, the topmost layer of thought in his mind was water. And by concentration, however deep and prolonged it might have been, he had only been able to temporarily suppress and lull his thoughts. When he regained consciousness, this topmost thought flew up with all the speed and force of a flood breaking through the dikes. If this is the case with regard to a thought which took shape immediately before we sat for meditation, there is no doubt that thoughts which took root earlier would also remain unannihilated. If annihilation of thoughts is liberation, can he be said to have attained salvation? Seekers rarely understand the difference between the temporary stilling of the mind, manolaya, and the permanent destruction of thoughts, manonasa. In manolaya, there is temporary subsidence of thought waves. And through this temporary period, which may last even for 1,000 years, thoughts, which are thus temporarily stilled, will rise up as soon as the manolaya ceases. One must therefore watch one's spiritual progress carefully. One must not allow oneself to be overtaken by such spells of stillness of thought. The moment one experiences this, one must revive consciousness and inquire within. Who is experiencing the stillness? While not allowing any thoughts to intrude, one must not at the same time be overtaken by this deep sleep, yoga nidra, or self-hypnotism. Though there is a sign of progress towards the goal, yet it is also the point where the divergence between the road to liberation and yoga nidra takes place. The easy way, the direct way, the shortest way to salvation is the way of inquiry. But by such inquiry, you will dive the thought force deeper until it reaches its source and merges therein. It is then, that you will have the response from within and find that you can rest there, destroying all thoughts once and for all. Questioner, this I thought does arise in me, but I do not know myself. An answer, all these are only mental concepts. You are now identifying yourself with the wrong I, which is the I thought. This I thought rises and sinks, whereas the true significance of I is beyond both. There cannot be a break in your being. You who slept are also now awake. There is no unhappiness in your deep dream state, a deep sleep state, whereas it does exist now. What is it that has happened now that this difference is experienced? There is no I thought in your sleep. It is present now. The true I is not apparent, and the true I is not apparent, and the false I is parading itself. This false I is the obstacle to your right knowledge. Find out from where this false I arises, then it will disappear, and you will then be only what you are. This is absolute being. Okay, there are many more pages in this chapter. So last question. There are said to be 6 organs of different colors in our chest, of which the heart is said to be 2 finger breadths to the right of the middle line. But the heart is also formless. Should we then imagine it to have a shape? Should we meditate on it? Ramana Maharshi says no. Only the quest who am I is necessary. What remains all through deep sleep and waking, that is the same. But in waking, there is unhappiness and the effort to remove it. Ask who wakes up from deep sleep and says, I. Now you are told to hold fast to this I. If it is done, the eternal being will reveal itself. Investigation of I is the point, and not the meditation on the heart center. There is nothing like within or without. Both mean either the thing or nothing. Of course, there is also the practice of meditation on the heart center. It is only a practice, it is not an investigation. Only the one who meditates on the heart can remain aware when the mind ceases to be active and remains still. Whereas those who meditate on other centers cannot be aware, but refer that the mind was still only after it became active again. All right, this is some good reading on the practice of self-inquiry. I know it's a little hard to understand in the beginning, but just because it's hard, one shouldn't give up. And remember, we don't do things for perfection, we do things for connection. And it's okay to do things in a clumsy and even wrong way in the beginning. There's plenty of help available to improve. So the sense of just being able to witness, the witness itself. Who am I? What am I? Where am I? What is happening now? I'm speaking. Ah, who's speaking? I am. Oh, really? Who am I? Very nice. So this is a deep topic, like I said, and it's okay to not fully understand it, but just because you don't fully understand it doesn't mean it's not valuable. And ask yourself simple questions like, who's taking delivery of this experience? All this diversity, where does it converge? What's the converging point? Keep coming back to the sense of I in different ways, asking yourself, what is awareness? Am I aware? Who is taking delivery of the experience? I am the observer of my actions, someone's writing. Well, you're aware. You're aware of these actions happening. It's a good first step, right? I'm aware of what's happening. I am. And then there's the second step, which you cannot make happen. It'll happen when it happens. It is what is prior to the I am, what is before that. That will make itself available to you. It's another step. So you do your best and you leave the rest. Do your best, leave the rest. Do your best in dharma, leave the rest to karma. What are the best? Is he referring to karma yogi? I mean, you could, I mean, ultimately all the yoga lead to the same place, but I think he's talking mostly about Gyan Yoga. When you talk about self-inquiry, it's Gyan Yoga. But yeah, he does say that you don't have to go to a separate place and start meditating for X number of hours a day. You could really integrate this into your life. And he says there's no conflict. No conflict. Good. Can I invite you all to share one line in the chat before we end? Let's hear a few things from you. What is it like for you to be part of this practice? Aham Brahmasmi. Awesome. Something a little different today. Instead of meditating, we've studied self-inquiry today. It connected, says Seema. That's nice. Wonderful, says Deep. Self-inquiry made me more known to myself. Okay. It makes me wonder about the I. Yeah. It helped me understand better. Very nice. Reflection to our inner being. Deep thoughts. Thank you for sharing the wisdom. Good. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and be well and take rest. All right.